Hello, this video is going to be mostly about the digestive system. I can share another link to a video about enzymes, but you should recall that enzymes have a substrate that they work on and a product that they generally create, and the substrate joins in the active site. Enzymes are proteins. And so they can denature at abnormal temperatures and pH levels and things like that. We can talk about that in a little bit. And so again, these graphs relate to like enzyme functions at particular pHs, particular temperatures. They can have better functioning, and outside of whatever their range is, they denature. In this graph, it's talking about how the rate of enzyme reaction increases as you get more substrate, right? More things to work on means you're doing more work, but only to a point, and then it levels off. It levels off at a high level though, right? Like at some point, all of the enzymes are busy working. And so adding more stuff for them to work on doesn't make their rate any faster. So this, most of this will go through parts of the digestive system in class. And I recommend that you do this. Take a bit, pause the video, and try to see how many of these organs can you label. Just as a guess. We're going to go through each one. All right. And so again, it's not just important that we know what the organs are of the digestive system, but what they do, right? What are the functions of the digestive system and what organs support those functions, okay? So if we go back here, I can annotate this theoretically. All right, so here we have, these are the parts you should know. Here's the mouth, sometimes called the oral cavity. Where's my mouse? I can't see my mouse right now. Right. These are the salivary glands that produce saliva, and that has enzymes in it. We'll talk about that in a second. Here's the pharynx, that back of the throat part that is shared with the respiratory system before the epiglottis. Gosh, again with the mouse situation here. All right. Here we go. And below the pharynx is the esophagus. So that is filled with muscle, a type of muscle called smooth muscle, and it actively pushes in this sort of like wavy pattern. We're not going to talk too much about that, but it actively pushes food down from the mouth after being chewed up with the teeth, and like you have saliva in there and whatever. And so it's actively pushing it, which does mean it's getting squished a little bit there. But it actively moves it down to the stomach. This big thing is the stomach, which has acid in it. It has enzymes in it to do breakdown. So we're doing multiple types of digestion, all of that. We're going to get more to this in a second. Below is this one is the pancreas. That is sort of behind and below the stomach. From the stomach, food goes into, I don't know why I cannot see my mouse. Might be better if I don't do this. Okay. From the stomach, food goes into this area here, which is the small intestine. And from there, it enters this big thing that crosses across, that's the large intestine, okay? At the end of the large intestine is the rectum, and then the anus is the exit of that. Other things here is the liver and the gallbladder. We'll go through each of these things. I want to clear these notations here in a little bit. All right, so here are the functions of the digestive system. There's ingestion, which is bringing food into the body, right? So we're talking about mostly the mouth in that case, okay? Then there's propulsion, so moving food from one organ to the next. A lot of organs do that. In fact, a lot of our organs will do multiple of these, okay? So the mouth swallows, that's propulsion. The esophagus propels the chewed up food from the mouth to the stomach. The stomach does a bit of propulsion from one end to the other into the small intestine. The small and the large intestine are all also doing propulsion, right? So there's a lot of, if it is involved in moving it from place to place, it's doing propulsion. Digestion is breaking food down. We'll talk about this difference between mechanical and chemical digestion in a moment. But that's happening in the mouth, in the esophagus, in the stomach, in the small intestine. So a lot of that is there. So it's not just enough to put it in your mouth, in your body, move it from place to place and break it down, right? That's good and all, but at the end of the day, the point of the digestive system is to absorb those nutrients into your body for use, all right? So we need to absorb and do absorption. That happens significantly in the small and large intestine. Okay. And then there's defecation, which is we're removing the unusable or indigestible parts from the body. Okay. Now I just mentioned a bunch of organs that are involved in these acts of digestion that are all sort of touching food or the remnants of food. But what about the pancreas or the liver or your teeth? How do they fit there? So there's actually two sort of major categories of these organs. There's organs of the GI tract, which effectively touch food or what used to be food. And they are part of this big tube that is your body, right? You're opening in the mouth and the anus, and between that, it's just all one big tube, okay? And so that is the GI tract. Things like the mouth, the pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the small intestine, large intestine, rectum. Okay, that's the GI tract. Everything else is an accessory organ. The tongue is an accessory organ, the teeth, the salivary glands, the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, all of that are, those are accessory organs, and they aid in the functioning of the other organs in the GI tract. Okay. As we get into this, right, so we go through all of those functions, you should be pretty familiar with those. Another thing that we'll note, and we're going to focus really in depth here, is in the small intestine, we're focusing on absorption. There is some digestion, particularly chemical digestion, that happens in the small intestine, and we'll talk about that in a moment with enzymes. But it's really important that, again, we're seeing this form, fits, function trend in the small intestine. The small intestine is designed and has become evolutionarily fit to aid in absorption of nutrients. That is the ultimate goal of our digestive system, is to bring nutrients into our body, all right, for our body to use and grow and all of that. And so in addition to the fact that the small intestine is this big foldy tube, which if you elongate it is way longer than you imagine. And the small intestine is called small because it's small in diameter, not because it's small in length. It's quite large, actually. And so not only does it have lots of folds, but if we look on the inside, the walls of the small intestine have these things, these projections called villi. So we're adding the folds and the folds and the folds add surface area. Okay, so it adds area on the surface where absorption can take place. In addition, you'll note that actually it's these little things are villi, and these larger ones are just called circular folds. So look at all these little villi. It actually reminds me of like a towel, right? The best towels have all those little things coming off and it absorbs the water really nicely. So the small intestine is itself folded. It has folds, and the folds on those folds are called villi. But guess what? We're not done. If we zoom in on a single villi, okay, so you'll notice that we have blood vessels here. That's where the absorption is going into the circulatory system, so it can be transported around. If we zoom in on these cells of the villi, right? So these villi are made of loads and loads of cells on the epithelium of the villi. On those cells, notice that they have microvilli, these little folds on the surface. So there's loads of these, and its structure is relating to its function to maximize the absorption. We really want to get the most out of the food that we digest. Another thing we've mentioned is chemical versus mechanical digestion. Mechanical digestion is breaking molecules into physically smaller pieces, right? I chew let me see if I have a piece of paper. Okay, so if I take this piece of paper and I rip it in half, that would be a mechanical digestion. I'm breaking it into a smaller piece. I haven't changed any of its properties other than its size. Okay, it's still paper. We do this when we chew food, right? We're breaking it up into physically smaller pieces. When the esophagus mushes it while it propels it, the stomach churns, all of that. That's mechanical digestion. We're breaking big things into small things of its same type. Chemical digestion, on the other hand, literally changes the molecular properties of that. So we would do this if we like burned it or something, okay? So where does this happen? So we're mechanically breaking down food in the mouth. Propulsion is mechanically breaking down food here as well. So it's happening in the mouth, it's happening in the stomach, and segmentation when it's in the small intestine or in the esophagus even, when it's moving like this through, it's like breaking it up into little pieces, okay? Then chemical digestion is happening anywhere enzymes are, all right? So the enzymes are going to take their substrate and change it into something else, break it down into a different molecule. That's happening in the mouth with some specific enzymes that are in saliva produced by the salivary glands. It's happening in the stomach with some specific enzymes that are happening there. It's happening in the small intestine as well. Okay, so we'll talk about those enzymes, right? So these enzymes are incredibly important for digestion. These slides are very complicated. I'll tell you sort of what you need to know, but it's going to go sort of through each macromolecule, right? So we studied all those macromolecules, and here we are talking about them in digestion. So we need carbs. Most of our carbs, especially the complex ones, are going to come in as starch or disaccharides like lactose, something like that, something that needs to be broken down. Okay, and the breakdown of carbs starts in the salivary glands. The salivary glands produce saliva, and one of the components of saliva is an enzyme called salivary amylase. So it's salivary, meaning it comes from the saliva, and amylase is referring to the fact that it's breaking down complex carbs, and it's in your mouth, right? So it comes from the salivary glands, it works in the mouth, it breaks down starches and these complex carbs into smaller carbohydrates. Pancreatic amylase is similar. It's also an amylase, but it's made in the pancreas, secreted into the small intestine. So the pancreas makes a boatload of enzymes and secretes them into the small intestine. That's why the pancreas is an accessory organ and not part of the GI tract. Nothing works in the pancreas in this case. It's all being secreted into the small intestine. And so that happens in the small intestine, same sort of thing. Okay. Then once we get to smaller saccharides, there's little teeny enzymes like lactase or maltase or sucrase, something like that, to break down things like lactose, maltose, and sucrose from disaccharides into monosaccharides. Okay. And that happens all in the small intestine. So we're constantly not just breaking things into physically smaller pieces, but breaking down large molecules into smaller molecules for digestion, okay? And it's those monosaccharides that enter the bloodstream in the villi. Proteins, the beginning of our digestion, of our chemical digestion of proteins, happens with an enzyme called pepsin in the stomach. Pepsin has, as part of evolution, is more functional in a lower pH. So it actually is functional, and it becomes functional in the presence of hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which is really interesting. And it then is no longer functional once it goes into the small intestine, and it becomes more of a neutral to basic pH there. So those enzymes break down large proteins into more like polypeptides, and then there's other enzymes, but you need to know pepsin, okay? And it happens in the stomach. There are other ones in the small intestine made by the pancreas or made by small intestine cells to, again, break things down from big polypeptides to small polypeptides to amino acids at the end of the day. And we're ultimately absorbing the monomers again. Pepsin is made in these cells that line our stomach, which is really interesting. And it's actually formed in an inactive form called pepsinogen, so that it doesn't start breaking down the cell that it's made in. And then when it's secreted into the stomach and is in the presence of hydrochloric acid, it becomes active in the form of pepsin, which is pretty cool. So again, you'll notice that loads of these enzymes are coming from the pancreas, all right? It's the only organ that produces enzymes to break down all types of digestible food. You'll notice that carbs were the only thing in the saliva. Protein was the only thing in the stomach, but the pancreas, it's producing enzymes for all macromolecules, okay? They all are made in the pancreas and they work in the small intestine because they're secreted from the pancreas here into, you'll notice this opening into the beginning of the small intestine. So again, pancreatic amylase, pancreatic enzymes for proteins, and similarly, in the small intestine, we're starting to digest lipids as well, from fats into glycerols and fatty acids and things like that. Okay. More on enzymes. All right, and that's it.